41 is now ready for premium boarding. We would like to invite business customers, Qantas and Emirates Platinum 1, Platinum and Gold, together with OneWorld, Emerald and Sapphire customers to board now using the designated premium boarding line on the right-hand side here at Gate 32. Please have your passports open to the photo page.
This video is brought to you by FS Academy Commander. FS Academy's latest package offers a range of challenging scenarios available within Microsoft Flight Simulator. Your command skills will be put to the test with emergency landings, system malfunctions, hazardous weather and more. The FS Academy series is created and taught by a real-world Airbus A320 captain, so the instruction throughout is both accurate and informed. FS Academy Commander will be available from the InSim marketplace, as well as from many of your favourite vendors. Hello again everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the recently released LatinVFR A330-900 NEO. The A330 certainly isn't intended to be a study-level aircraft. The jet generally offers a more mid-level experience. However, the aircraft does offer some functionalities that are specific to the A330 and do go above and beyond what we see with the default A320. The aircraft also comes with an onboard EFB, and we have many nice functionalities associated with that, including SimBrief integration, Navigraph chart integration, as well as the ability to receive live weather updates, configure the aircraft on the fly. Undoubtedly, the LatinVFR A330, it's not necessarily the sort of product that personally interests me in the sim, but I thought it'd be interesting to see what we get at this sort of level within Microsoft Flight Simulator. For our flight today, we're currently on stand 53 here at Sydney's Kingsford Smith International Airport, and we're going to be taking the 900 on a run over the Tasman Sea towards Auckland. We'll be cruising our way over at flight level 390, about 2.5 hours in the cruise, uploading just shy of 29 tonnes of Jet A1 for the flight. Once again, the LatinVFR A330-900 not intended to be a study level add-on, so I don't intend to judge the aircraft by those standards. However, I will point out any inaccuracies as we go. They aren't necessarily intended to be criticisms, rather just to inform you of the level of fidelity of the add-on. This flight is somewhat intended to be more of a first impressions as opposed to a full review. Being obviously very familiar already with the Airbus and its systems, I thought we'd just take the aircraft for a flight and see what we find along the way. As always, I do hope you enjoyed the flight. If you do, then please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel. So good morning and welcome to the cockpit of the LatinVFR Airbus A330-900. As you can see, we're currently on stand 53 here on the ground at Sydney's Kingsford Smith International Airport, and we're going to be taking our A330 today over towards Auckland. Once again, this aircraft is by no means study level, and I'm not looking to critique it in such a fashion, but we'll run through the setup and the systems just to give you a feel for what is and isn't working with the Airbus. We just boarded the jet. So far we've got the APU started up, and I've worked my way around the cockpit just to get things into a more reasonable configuration, as you might find the aircraft when you first board. So starting with the overhead, firstly the wipers, we may get to see those going into Auckland later on. There is forecast for a little bit of rain. Those do work on the aircraft, which is nice. Most of the secondary switching though doesn't seem to work. For example, here we'd typically select the crew oxygen supply on. That switch is inoperative. And same there for the cockpit voice recorder ground control. So working our way up, the fire test there as well. Typically we'd carry out an APU fire test ahead of the start, and that's inoperative as you can see. The IR switches do work, so we'll select those through to nav. We can start the IRs aligning. In terms of the lighting, the strobes, we'll leave those in auto. Nav lights, we do have the option between system 1 and 2, which is nice. A lot of aircraft don't get that correct. For now we'll leave the rest of the switching in its default position. No smoking signs, only 2 positions there. In reality we should have 3. We'll leave that in, should be in auto, but we'll leave that in on. And we've already got the aircraft fueled up. The screens are a little bit dim, I find as well. You'll notice that throughout. We've got 28.9 tonnes of fuel on board the aircraft currently. That is as per the flight plan, so seatbelt signs can go on there as well. Again, much of the switching here is inoperative. For example, the pressurization switching, you can see none of that's clickable. In terms of the air panel, we've got the cockpit and cabin temperature selectors set through to the 10 o'clock position. Those do work. Backflow there as well, inoperative. And same there for the cross bleed valve. On the electrical panel, battery switching is working, gallium commercial switch is not working. Again, we do have external power, and you can actually select a visible external power unit via the onboard tablet, which is a nice touch. The fuel panel looks the part. Unfortunately though, only the main pumps are currently working. The standby pumps there are just for show. The transfer into the trim tank is actually modelled to some degree, which is nice. And hydraulic panel again, most of the switching there is currently inoperative. Same goes for the engine fire panel, and working our way up the right hand side of the overhead again, much the same story. Most of the switching, as you can see there, is currently inoperative. So overall, a pretty mixed bag, I would say, pretty much on a par with the default Airbus in the sim, although there are some concessions made to the A330, so the aircraft does feel more appropriate for an Airbus A330 as opposed to many other add-ons which tend to just make use of the default A320. Although I've no doubt there is much of the default A320 going on here behind the scenes. The forward main instrument panel, again, most of the switching here is inoperative. The gear is selected down, we do have 3 greens, accumulator pressure looks good, and the anti-skid nose wheel steering switch is selected on. That does seem to be modelled. Again, they're very difficult to make out the screens, really under any sort of daylight conditions. I do have them fully turned up here at the moment on the brightness. Working our way down the centre console, we'll program the MCDU in just a moment's time. Radios will leave as is. Again, got the lighting fully turned up. The weather radar is modelled to some degree, and we'll see that later on. Again, switching not modelled. The ECAM is a little bit of a strange one. We'll discuss that in just a moment, but the switching's quite unusual in how it works, not true to life of the real-world aircraft. Thrust levers are set through to the idle detent. Engine masters are selected off. Engine start switch is set through to normal. We do also have the MCDU 3 modelled, although that just mirrors the other 2 MCDUs on the aircraft. Part brakes set, and again the cockpit door and camera controls there are inoperative. Rudder trim is 0, and working our way down the right hand side, again we'll come back to the MCDU in just a moment. Radios are good. Transponder seems to be modelled, TCAS doesn't seem to be modelled, which is a little bit of a shame. And we'll squawk 2000 here for the flight today. In terms of the EFIS switching, we'll take the flight directors on. Again, the lighting there, quite difficult to make out the difference between having the selection on or off. Go constraints here on both sides, we'll leave arc 20 for the time being. In terms of the initial stop height, we're going to be climbing today straight up to cruise flight level. That's going to be flight level 390.
2259 Heavy Sydney Tower, good morning. Wind 270 degrees, 5 knots. Runway 25, cleared to land.
So we have 390 selected there on the FCU. And we'll see 390 later on there on the PFD. That's about it in terms of the preliminary cockpit setup. We'll come down to the MCDU. We can begin programming that for the flight. So for the aircraft status, it's an A330-900. We have Rolls-Royce Trent 7072 engines fitted. Nav database, slightly out of date there, but more or less current. On the init A page, we're taking the aircraft from Sydney, so Yankee, Sierra, Sierra, Yankee, over towards Auckland, November, Zulu, Alpha, Alpha. We'll hit return. Alternate for the flight today is Christchurch, so November, Zulu, Charlie, Hotel. Flight number is QANTAS, so Quebec, Foxtrot Alpha 141. And cost index for the flight, it's going to be a cost index of 48. Cruise flight level as discussed, flight level 390. In terms of the IRs, checking the GPS position there, we'll align on the reference.
Sydney Tower, good morning, Cathay 111.
In terms of the winds, we're going to leave those as is. Doesn't look as though they're currently functional on the aircraft, and same, we'll leave the cruise temp and the standard tropopause there on the init A. The flight plan then, we're departing out of Sydney, planning off runway 34 left, and it's going to be the Wollongong to departure. So Wollongong 2 selected, we can insert that. Building up the flight plan from Wollongong, we'll be tracking direct to waypoint Evon. That's Echo, Victor, Oscar, November, November. and then from waypoint Evon, we'll be joining the Lima 521 airway.
0125, clear to land, Cathay 111.
And that's going to take us out towards waypoint Lumby, Lima Uniform November Bravo India. And from Lumby, we'll be joining the star, so we'll insert that. So we've got Wollongong, Evon, out towards waypoint Lumby. Then from Lumby, we're expecting currently the RLS-05 right into Auckland. And we're going to be joining the Aradi 7 Bravo arrival. And we'll be coming in via waypoint Lengu. Transition will be waypoint Lumby. So we've got RLS-05 right, Lengu, Aradi 7 Bravo, transitioning via waypoint Lumby. We can insert all of that. We'll just work our way quickly through the flight plan. So out towards Wollongong initially, then on towards Evon, Lima 521 to Lumby, and then joining in the arrival, coming in via waypoint Lengu, in for the RLS-05 right. Safety flight plan doesn't look as though that's currently modelled on the aircraft. Onto the RadNav page, we'll leave everything auto-tuning for now. In terms of the init B, it looks there as though the fields have already auto-populated. Just checking there against the flight plan, we should see a zero fuel weight of 156.9. We've got 156.5. So we'll just update that. Doesn't look as though we can actually populate those particular fields. I guess those are auto-populated by the aircraft. Max zero fuel weight 25.7, block fuel 29 tons, that is correct. Onto the performance page, I did calculate some numbers there using the onboard tablet. Again, we'll take a brief look at that later on in the flight, but again the screen is very dim, so I thought it'd be preferable here to use paper charts for the flight today. And similarly, I calculated some V-speeds using an online calculator tool as well. Those seem to be quite significantly different to the V-speeds provided by the tablet. We're going to go with the V-speeds that I calculated online. So V1 is 151, VR is 156, V2 is 162, the config is going to be config 1 and stab trim of up 4.5. Flex temperature today is 55 degrees, so the aircraft there is correct in terms of what I calculated. And the transition altitude is 10,000 feet. Thrust reduction and acceleration we'll leave at 1500. Just briefly coming onto the progress page, we'll put Sydney, Yankee, Sierra, Sierra, Yankee, runway 34 left. Doesn't look as though we can do that currently in the aircraft. We'll try putting in just Sydney. Okay, so the progress page as well, they're not really working correctly. Anyway, that's it in terms of the initial setup. Just briefing the departure. Again, it's going to be the Wollongong 2 departure here out of Sydney's Kingsford Smith. Let's plate 10-3 Echo. It's a conventional SID. However, we will be leaving the nav aids auto-tuning. In terms of the departure itself then, it's going to be tracking 335 initially at 800 feet, making a left turn to track 290 out towards 10 miles from the Sierra Yankee. At 10 miles, another left turn to track 260. After passing 7,000 feet, we'll turn left again, tracking in towards waypoint Ankub. And from Ankub, we'll track 182 out towards the Wollongong NDB. Once again, the transition altitude is 10,000 feet. Max 250 knots as well, below 10,000 as you'd expect. In terms of the terrain, there is high terrain out to the west of Sydney. We've got hills there out towards the west of Wollongong up to around 3,000 feet. MSA for the departure, 2,700. Weather-wise, it's a very pleasant day here, 28 degrees. The wind's 030 at 9, so just a slight crosswind off runway 34 left. Lastly, in terms of the taxi, again currently on stand 5-3 here at the international terminal. We're going to be pushing back. We'll have the nose facing out towards the south. We'll probably join onto Yankee, then onto Hotel, we'll take Alpha, all the way down to holding point Alpha 6 for runway 34 left. So that's it in terms of our preliminary cockpit setup. Again, a pretty mixed bag here on the LVFR A330-900 so far. The aircraft's certainly not study level, again it doesn't pretend to be, but there are some features missing that I would have expected to see. Nevertheless though, so far the aircraft pretty much slotting in exactly where I would expect. We should have the passengers boarding fairly shortly, and it's definitely worth taking a look at the cabin. That's been modelled quite nicely by LatinVFR. So we'll take a wander through there, and then we'll come back to the cockpit ahead of the push and start.
Please place your bags either under the seat in front of you or in the overhead lockers. If you're seated at a bulkhead or in an exit row, all bags need to go in the overhead lockers. It's now time to switch your phone and other devices to flight mode. You're welcome to use handheld devices during takeoff, but laptops and other large devices need to be put away until we're in the air. Devices without flight mode cannot be used at any time. If you're in premium economy, please keep the small pocket below your screen empty during takeoff. All cords and cables must be removed from the seatback for takeoff and entertainment screens stowed. Make sure your seatbelt or sash belt is firmly fastened, and as always, smoking, vaping and the use of e-cigarettes is not permitted. Please help us to create a safe, respectful and positive environment for everybody on board by respecting each other and our crew.
Okay, so welcome back to the flight deck. The passengers have now finished boarding. We'll just close up the last of the aircraft doors. And just to demonstrate a little bit of the functionality here, we'll use the onboard tablet. As you can see, slightly dark there in terms of the screen. This is actually one of the screens that's easier to read. So just click on the door icon there. We should see the door close up momentarily. The slide is now armed. If we go back to the home page, for example, I was going to make use of the onboard Navigraph functionality, which is very nice to have. But again, slightly hard there to read some of the tabs. I think it'd be easier if we just stick with the paper charts throughout the flight. Similarly, again, we can calculate V-speeds. According to the takeoff performance calculator here, it says we've got an invalid weight value. However, 185 tons is rounded, so I'm not quite sure why it says it's invalid. And again, the V-speeds are quite a bit lower than the ones we calculated here online. That being said, I used a calculator for the A330-900, so that may be fairly inaccurate versus the 900. The 900 does apparently have a more efficient wing, slightly more powerful engines as well. So potentially possible that the V-speeds do differ quite a bit. Anyway, we are cleared for the push and start. We'll take the beacon light on. Transponder can go through to auto. And for the before start checklist, the cockpit preparation has been completed. Gear pins and covers have been removed. Signs are on and on in this case, should be on an auto. Adders are set through to nav, fuel quantity. Again, we have 28.9 tons on board the aircraft as per the flight plan. Takeoff data is set. The barrel ref, we have a QNH of 1011 set there on both sides. Below the line, windows and doors are closed. Cockpit door there as well. Again, the controls don't work, but we do have the cockpit door closed now, and that is operative on the aircraft. Beacon is on, thrust levers are idle, the park brake can come off, and that is the before start checklist complete. So, commencing the push, we are cleared for the push and start. We'll take the engine start selector through to ignition start, and we'll start engine 1.
QANTAS 7524, heavy Sydney Tower, continue approach, threshold wind 270 degrees 6 knots.
So again, the screen's very tricky to read there. We've got N1 indications as well. I suspect in reality it'd either be EPA indications, or possibly on some of the new Airbuses is actually a percentage thrust indication. Nevertheless, we do see N2 rotation, although the Rolls-Royce engine actually a triple spool engine. So again, definitely borrowing a lot here from the default A320 as best I can tell. But I do think that's to be expected.
Yankee International 5 for 51, Cathay 111 Booker.
As usual, we'll just monitor the push, make sure we stay within the boundaries here on the apron.
On a 7524, wind 290 degrees 5 knots, runway 25, clear to land.
And waiting here on the number 1 to stabilise. The engine's still spooling up here at the moment. Fairly nice in terms of the spool up time overall. That seems fairly plausible for a big high bypass engine. So just coming back in towards the taxi line here out of the apron. Again, we'll stop with the nose just behind the line. Good start there on engine 1. We'll start engine 2. The engine sounds are okay. To be fair, on a wide body, obviously the engines are quite far behind the flight deck, so you don't hear all that much of the startup, depending on the engine variant. Okay, so good there in terms of the push. We'll stop the tug, park brake can go on.
Good morning, Tower United 839, non-final to runway 25.
United 839, heavy Sydney Tower.
And once again, the number 2 spooling up. We do have a good light off, showing an increase there in fuel flow. So just waiting on the number 2 here to stabilise. The tug should clear momentarily.
Qantas 7524, contact ground 126.5.
And as I said, I do like the fact the engines take quite a bit of time to spool up. Not always the case with these sorts of add-ons.
United A39, wind 310 degrees, 5 knots, runway 25, clear to land.
We should also see an available indication once the engine's stable. I suspect we're probably not going to see that. And sure enough, we don't get one, but we do have 2 good starts, so the engine start selector can go back through to normal. We'll start the chrono, which actually also seems to be an operative on the aircraft. That's the sort of functionality you'd really expect to see. I think that even works on the default A320 if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, the APU bleed can go off, same there for the APU master. We'll reset the rudder trim. We can arm up the spoilers. Again, config 1 here for the takeoff. And for the stab trim, we're looking for 4.5 units up. That is set. On the door page, we have all 8 slides armed. Again, the ECAM switching, as I mentioned earlier, is a little bit strange. You can't actually deselect the switch once you've selected it, so you have to just select the page that's most appropriate at the time. If you want the cruise page, you've actually got to use all to cycle through, so that's quite inaccurate, and again, a bit strange in terms of behaviour. For the time being, we'll take the flight control page. We're going to be using that on the way out for the flight control check. We are clear on the right, and clear on the left. We'll take the nose light through to taxi. Runway turn-off light can go on. The click spot there seems to be awfully close to the click spot there for the sun visor. The after start checklist, the anti-ice is off. ECAM status is checked. We should get a status message displayed if we have any status messages, but nevertheless the status page looks good. Pitch trim. Once again, we have 4.5 units set. And for the rudder trim, that is 0. So the off-start check is complete. The tug is now finally clearing. That is quite a realistic amount of time for the tug to disconnect and clear, but it's a bit strange in the sim to see that. But nevertheless, I suppose a nice touch. I don't know if that's owing to the aircraft or just a fluke here in the sim. Anyway, the ground equipment is clear. The park brake can come off. We're not particularly heavy here today, so I'd expect the aircraft to more or less want to start moving under its own idle thrust. And that's pretty much the case, just needing a little bit of thrust here to get the jet rolling. But that behaviour there is actually quite nice. So again, we'll turn left here onto Yankee, second left onto Hotel, first right onto Alpha. Once we're cleared to cross runway 07, it'll be down Alpha. The holding point Alpha 6, off runway 34 left.
Roger Dave, what's the 841 0,000 information? Well, the 841 stand by 1, break 138 and left heading 30. Heading 360, Qantas 7. Well, the 80s and by started and runway 16 right, expect approach, then independent division. Star 6000, copy, what was the 841?
Approach X-ray, left passing 6,600, flight level 140.
X-ray, Victor approach, time initially 9,000 feet.
Okay, so we're on Alpha now, taxiing for holding point Alpha 6, running through the before takeoff checks. First carry out the flight control check, so we have full up, pull down, and neutral, full left, full right, and neutral. And again, you do have to bring up the flight control page manually. Doesn't seem as though the flight control page is brought up there by the movement of the flight controls. We're not going to test the rudder here. I don't have a button bound to the rudder disconnect push button. In terms of the briefing, it's the Wollongong 2 departure again, off runway heading initially, left turn, climbing flight level 390. On the FMAs there we've got lever MTT, which we shouldn't see, that's a bit strange, but otherwise we have climb nav blue and 1 FT2, which we're expecting. Terrain display there on the first officer side, it seems as though the 2 nav displays are actually mirrored, so we'll take that off again. Auto brake 3 to max, we'll carry out a takeoff config test. And again, the screen's pretty tricky to read, but we do have takeoff no blue. The weather radar is modelled. I'm pretty sure that's just using the default Microsoft Flight Simulator system. Looks as though the predictive wind shear is not modelled. We'll just get ourselves here into the holding point, and then we'll carry out the before takeoff checklist. I've noticed as well the turn radius on the jet is not particularly good. It does look as though my rudder pedals there are operating the tiller, so I'm not quite sure why. Actually needing a little bit of braking here just to increase that turn radius, which is not true to life.
Qantas 738, director 1.1 below again.
161, Qantas 738.
So holding point Alpha 6, we'll just get the jet straightened up. And we'll take the part brake on, just carry out the before takeoff checklist. So the flight controls are checked, flight instruments are checked, briefing is confirmed, flap setting. We have config 1 plus F. V-speeds and thrust, we have V1 151, VR 156, V2 162, and a flex of 55 degrees. ATC is set, ECAM MO. Okay, auto brake max, that seems to have dropped out. It shouldn't have done, not quite sure why, but we have takeoff no blue. Cabin crew have been advised, engine start selector is set through to normal. Packs are on, that is the before takeoff checklist complete. So clear for the takeoff, it's all clear on final. We'll take the landing lights on, nose light through to takeoff, and strobe lights. A little bit tricky to see the positioning there of the switch, those are now in the on position. Needing quite a bit of thrust here to get the jet rolling, or at least quite a bit of thrust lever movement on my hardware. There's runway 34 left confirmed. Be interesting to see how the thrust behaves during the takeoff here with the lever MCT advisory there on the FMA. Once again, no EPA gauge here, so we'll just come up to around 50% here on the M1s.
Velocity 841, contact 6, stay some more 1.
1261, 841.
And the engines are stable. Takeoff. Okay, nice detents there on the thrust levers. And nice sounds there from the engines overall. We have Manflex 55. No SRS. We do have runway. Auto thrust blue. It's 100 knots. Already I can feel the nose there wanting to get pretty light, which is not realistic. We'll just keep the nose down for now. There's V1. And rotate. Yeah, so the jet pretty much wanting to auto-rotate at that point, which is, again, not true to life of the aircraft. Anyway, we do have positive climb. We'll take the gear up. And we'll pitch for 15 degrees. The flight director's there not commanding anything close to that. We do now have SRS there on the FMA. Okay, we do have decent lateral guidance, so we'll follow that. And up through 1500 feet, we do have lever climb and climb there on the FMA, which we're expecting to see. Thrust levers in the climb detent. And we'll just wait until the aircraft is accelerating. We're above S speed. Just going to go for an open climb here, try and force those flight directors to give us something more useful. So we have thrust climb, open climb. Those pitch bars still not really giving us what we would expect. We'll come down to around 10 degrees, let the aircraft accelerate. Speed is checked, we'll go flaps 0. Okay, the flight director bars now looking much more reasonable. We'll follow those and accelerate up towards 250 knots. Slightly overshot the turn there. Overall, the lateral guidance seems to be fairly decent.
Turning 6, through flight 0.
Australian break, QANTAS 994, 130, setting in airshoot.
So flaps are up. We'll take the nose light off, runway turn off lights off. You can disarm the spoilers. We'll take the autopilot in. So we have nav, autopilot 1. We should already have seen nav. We already were in nav. Coming out on the range there, 40 miles, out towards Wollongong. We're just tracking in towards waypoint Anchorb at the moment. And up through 7,000 feet. Just cycle the signs. The after takeoff checklist, the landing gear is up, flaps are retracted, packs are on. That is the after takeoff checklist complete. So tracking along the coast, we've got the airport out behind us. We should get a nice view of that once we commence the turn over waypoint Anchorb. Once we're up through 10, we'll give ourselves a direct to the first waypoint off the SYD. That's waypoint Evon. See how the aircraft handles that. Previously I seem to recall the default A320 really not liking direct 2s, and again I'm sure we're using all of the same programming here as far as the FMS goes. Just come up through 10, so we'll take the landing lights off, and the aircraft now accelerating up towards 320 knots. So commencing the turn, and as I say, we'll now go direct waypoint Evon. That does look good. We'll insert. And I was a little bit concerned there for a second, but it does look as though the aircraft's taken it, so that's nice to see. It hasn't actually drawn in the turn though, it's just gone direct from our present position, so we're actually going to once again overshoot the turn. So now we've got a decent view just off the 9 o'clock position of the airfield. Hopefully as well we'll get a bit of a view of the Sydney CBD there. A little bit tricky to make out, fairly hazy conditions here today. We're up through 10,000, so we'll go to standard on the altimeters. No indication there that we need to switch over to standard. And those are both synced, so we have standard set and cross-checked. We'll come out again on the range. There's waypoint Evon, about 40 miles to run. And just to help the aircraft here, we're going to go direct to again.
QANTAS 990, 0,000, QNH 10.
10,000, 994.
That way we don't have to overshoot the turn to come back onto the flight plan track. So the autopilot there, a little bit hit and miss. Overall it is doing what we want. We're now maintaining 320 knots here in the climb, up to flight level 390, tracking inbound towards waypoint Evon.
Victor, shoots an aircraft at 0.
We'll try once again for a managed climb. So we have thrust climb. So as I say, the aircraft overall does a reasonable job, a little bit hit and miss in terms of some of the implementation. Anyway, beautiful view of Sydney there as we track off the eastern coastline of Australia. Not a whole lot for us to see en route. We're mostly going to be tracking out over the Tasman Sea. We're going to have around 2.5 hours here in the cruise as we make our way up towards flight level 390. We didn't get all that much of an opportunity to see the external model of the LVFR A330-900 on the ground in Sydney, so we'll certainly do that as we make our way over towards Auckland. The forecast in Auckland not quite as nice as we have here today on the eastern coast of Australia. At the moment we're looking at light drizzle, scattered cloud around 2,300 feet, broken at around 3,500, temperature around 18 degrees. So the weather is probably going to deteriorate a little bit here en route, but nevertheless reasonable conditions for our arrival later on today.
Flight 6,000 and A4 QANTAS 994. Approach today, killing 49,000 feet. Thank you for pass.
Killing 410. Call from Tammy 010 toward base, about 40 miles.
From Tammy 010 heading and away on the 9,000 clock.
QANTAS 994, hot climate Tammy and best state till 6,000.
Best state till 6,000, cancel requirement Tammy QANTAS 994.
Killing 410, descend 6,000, runway 166, ILS approach, independent on visual. Cement up 9,000 all below by me.
To 6,000 feet. Seat by runway 1614.
No, 03, approach today to 8000, traffic split, expected hitch, independent visual approach. 6000, well, someone 0 expected, intercept, final approach at 25 miles. Actually, close minute.
Roger that, velocity 410.0, received.
78 approach today, stand by south, runway 16 right, approach, and then approach provision.
Somebody 676 right, velocity 410. Approach, good afternoon, 36, and with time, mate. Bye-bye.
Unit 436, approach to west, runway 16 right, approach, and then provision.
We're ready to and runway 16, link 436. Good approach. Good afternoon. 23 is awarded to 9000 with information.
Ambulance 276, approach today. When me, descend by 6000, 6 right, expect pilot, and then visual approach provision.
So, welcome back to the flight deck of the Airbus A330-NEO. We just passed over waypoint Lundby, and we are now approaching our top descent point, about 10 miles to run. In terms of our altitude selection, on the way down we've only got at or above restrictions, so we'll go straight down to 3,000 feet. We'll set that here on the FCU.
QANTAS 7524, descend to 6,000.
So we're at flight level 30, and still about another 5 miles to run here before top of descent. We'll try for a managed descent ahead of time. The aircraft should give us 1,000 feet permanent rate of descent until we hit the VNAV path again. That's just giving us out cruise, so a bit inaccurate there in terms of the flight management. You'll notice as well here on the FMA that we've got lever asymmetry. I've had that throughout the cruise and really not sure why we're seeing that. I've got both thrust levers set identically, and certainly there's no way that could be my hardware either. I have one throttle assigned to both throttles here in the sim. Anyway, we are now at top of descent. We'll try again for a managed descent. Looks like the aircraft isn't going to want to descend here until we've actually passed through that top descent point. And you can see we now have descent out blue with a constraint there, flight level 30, so hopefully we'll meet our altitude restrictions on the way down. We'll certainly keep an eye on the VNAV as we go. We're just going to let the aircraft manage everything as best it can here. We'll see how we get on. In the meantime here, as we descend, we'll brief up the arrival, we'll get the aircraft set up. So once again, we are now cleared for the Iradi 7 Bravo arrival. The ILS-05 right. The star is plate 10-2 Charlie, it's an RNAV star, and GPS is primary. Again coming in via waypoint Lundby, then on towards waypoint Iradi. In terms of restrictions on the way down, we've got max 280 knots at waypoint Jabba, above 10,000 feet, above 7,000 at Alpha 514, max 240 at waypoint Zoka, above 5,000 feet, and above 4,000 at Alpha 506. Ultimately, we want to be at waypoint Lengu, that's the initial approach fix. Max 210 knots and above 3,000. The transition level on the way down is flight level 150, we'll set that up in the box in just a moment's time. From waypoint Lengu, we're going to be joining on to the ILS runway 05 right. That is plate 11-1. The frequency we're looking for there is 110.3, final approach course is 051. Aerodrome elevation is 23 feet. We're going down to the Cat 1 MDA of 215, and for the missed approach is tracking runway heading out towards MRAG, mandatory at 3,000 feet. The maximum speed for the missed approach 185 knots, so we'll be holding config 1 here if we need to make a go around. In terms of the terrain, we do have high terrain around Auckland, primarily out towards the west. The MSA for the arrival 3,400 feet. In terms of the weather, again, just briefly looking at the EFB functionality, we can pull up a weather report or request the current METAR at Auckland. So the wind 020 at 10 knots, again using runway 05 right. 10 k's plus visibility, few at 3,500, broken at 44, 17 degrees, QNH is 1022. In terms of the landing, 05 right will be vacating off to the left, most likely via Alpha 3. We'll then be backtracking Alpha in towards the international terminal. Currently planning on using idle reverse. We'll go with auto brake low. Fuel wise, again, Christchurch the alternate for the flight today. We need around 7.5 tonnes of fuel for Christchurch. The flight plan, we had 3.6 in terms of contingency final reserve. We also had about an extra 6 tonnes of fuel to support the ETOPS segment of the flight. So all up, we should be arriving with around 18 tonnes of fuel. Looks like it's going to be closer to 15, so it seems as though the fuel burn on the NEO perhaps just slightly higher than the real aircraft, just using the SimBrief figures. Nevertheless, again, 7.5 needed for Christchurch, so we've got about an extra 7.2 tonnes. That's about an extra hour and 10 minutes, plenty of fuel should we need to hold. In terms of the aircraft setup, the flight plan's already been set up earlier on, as we saw, and already been checked. On the RadNav page, we should be seeing 110.3 and an identifier of India Alpha Alpha. The aircraft here looks as though it's slightly different in terms of how it displays the ILS. We've got ILS 05 right identified, and the final approach course there of 051. On the performance page, we'll enter the performance data. So again, we set the QNH 1022, temperature of 17 degrees.
Japan F51, keep speed 180 knots until you have passed 7 miles.
There are quite a few peculiarities with the aircraft. For example, they're having the decimals after the QNH is inaccurate, and there's lots of little details. If you are familiar with the 330, or indeed really any Airbus, then the LVFR 330 can be a little bit strange. In terms of the wind, 020 at 10. And transition level we said was flight level 150. We're showing a V approach there of 155, which seems awfully high. We'll take a look at that again later on. Down to the MDA of 215. And again, unfortunately we can't put anything here in the progress page for bearing and distance. Similarly, I noticed during the climb of the cruise, we don't get a cruise altitude displayed there, nor do we get an optimum or a rec max, which does make flying the NEO efficiently just that little bit more tricky. Just to run you through the flight plan again, if we come through to the flight plan page. So we've currently just passed over waypoint Lumby, now tracking towards waypoint Aradi. And then as discussed, we'll be tracking in via Jamba, Alpha Alpha 514. Then on towards waypoint Soccer, Alpha Alpha 506. We've got thrust idle there, so the aircraft bringing the thrust all the way back now to try and maintain VDEV.
Cathay 111, turn right, heading 150 base.
Then waypoint Lengu again, plus 3,000 foot, back at 210 knots at Lengu. And then from Lengu, joining onto the ILS for runway 05 right. We'll come back into arc, and we'll go with a range of 80 miles for now. As well, with the limited programming here in the MCGU, there's no ability here to see our VDEV, for example. No VDEV scale there on the PFD. So we can't really see readily how high or low we are on the profile. Just coming through flight level 250, and we need to be at or above 10,000 feet Jabba, so we're good there on the restriction. Flight level 250 means we need around 100 miles to run, and currently showing around 127, so I'd say if anything at the moment we're just a little bit low. Anyway, we'll continue here in the descent. Actually looks as though the weather's clearing up a little bit here as we approach the New Zealand coastline. As we come down through flight level 200, we'll get the seatbelt signs back on. We'll continue with our preparations both up the front here and down the back. And I'll come back to you again as we approach waypoint Lengu for the ILS onto runway 05 right.
Cathay 111, turn right, heading 210 to join final approach course runway 25, cleared the GLS approach.
Right, heading 210, cleared GLS approach 25, Cathay 111.
United 839, turn left, heading 050.
Left heading 050, United 839.
Qantas 7524, turn right, heading 355, descend to 4000.
So, welcome back once again. We are just approaching the shoreline now of New Zealand's North Island. Just coming down through 5,500 feet. We've got about 25 miles to run, just passing over waypoint Alpha Alpha 506. We've now got the seatbelt signs back on, the landing lights are on there as well. We've come onto the QNH, we've got 1022 set and cross-checked on both sides. 5,000 feet means we need around 20 miles to run, currently showing 24. Interestingly, the aircraft just diverting slightly off the flight plan path here, and we're showing Ugris as the 2 waypoint, despite still tracking towards waypoint Lengu. So a little bit of an error there from the aircraft. We'll just come into heading, and we'll correct ourselves back onto the flight plan route. Go the heading of 050 for now. Speed's also come back to green dot, so the approach phase has been activated automatically by the aircraft, which is nice to see. We've got speed there on the FMA. Also worth noting actually that the trim tank has transferred automatically forward, which is correct and true to life for the 330, so that's great. The fuel from the trim tank has been transferred into the wing tanks. Anyway, just keeping an eye on our distance to go there, we've got another 20 miles. Ground speed 233 knots, so we need a vertical speed of around 1100 feet per minute. Just increase that vertical speed slightly. In terms of the approach checks, the briefing is confirmed, ECAM status is checked, seatbelts are on. The barrier ref, we have QNH of 1022. MDA is 215. Engine mode selector is normal, so the approach checklist complete. We've also got the LS push button selected here, so we should be picking up the ILS fairly shortly. Again, we'll just come back onto a reasonable heading here with the Loke. Coming through 20 miles now, we'll go selected speed. And we'll take flaps 1, so speed is checked. There's flaps 1. We'll keep reducing back towards 180 knots. And we have 180 selected. Should really be picking up the ILS by now, I'm not sure why we're not. We'll just come onto the RadNav page again and try putting that in manually. So again, we're looking for a frequency of 110.3.
United 839, descend to 4,000.
Not going to let us do that. We'll try putting it in the primary field. Okay, 110.3, and sure enough we have India Alpha Alpha, so a little bit of an error there from the aircraft. We'll come on to a heading of 040, and just levelling off at 3,000, assuming we are now cleared for the approach. We can only take one autopilot there with the approach armed, which again is inaccurate. We have Loke, autopilot 1, glide slope blue, speed back towards 175 knots. And as soon as we get to around 1 dot high there on the glide, we'll take flaps 2. Let's check 2,500. 30 miles to run. Speed is checked. It's flaps 2. And visual now with the runway. They're maintaining 180 knots or 175 till around 7 miles. Just coming through 12. We'll take the gear down at 8. And we can come in again on the range. Once we're on the glide, which we should get momentarily, there's glide slope. Missed approach altitude is 3,000 feet, so we have missed approach altitude 3,000 set. And the aircraft doing a reasonable job here of tracking the Loke, getting in just a touch higher on the glide slope. Thrust back idle, just about maintaining the speed. We'll just take the gear down a little bit early, give ourselves some more drag. Showing 80 miles to run now, which is definitely inaccurate. The box does seem to get inaccurate as you go through waypoints. You can see now coming back towards 9 miles, which is confirmed there against the ILS, showing 8 miles to run. Speed on the FMA. And again, just holding the glide. Got about 22 knots from the left, expecting 020 at 10 knots going off the ATIS. Through 7 miles, we'll go 160 knots. And speed to check, we'll take flaps 3.
Got 7524, descend to 3,000.
Still showing that lever asymmetry. No idea why we're seeing that. And once again, speed to check, we'll go flaps full. Approaching 5.5 miles, really having to lean in here to see some of the information on the screens. Those are the sorts of things I would like to see working out of the box. It doesn't really matter whether or not it's a study level add-on or not. You'd like to be able to read the displays. Not quite sure why the screens are as dim as they are. Anyway, we have managed speed with the landing checklist. Cabin crew have been advised the auto thrust is speed, ECAM memo, just the spoilers and the lights there to come as we take the gear down. Again, that click spot for the runway terminal flight, pretty bad. We'll just leave that for now. Nose light set through to take off. So for the ECAM memo, we have landing node blue. Auto brake is low, that is the landing check is complete. And the approach now back at around 140 knots, so that looks much more accurate than we saw initially in the box during the setup. Just coming through 1,000 feet, that is checked. 1,000, we are stable. Looks as though we're slightly out to the left of the runway centre line here. We'll just leave the autopilot in just a touch longer, see what the aircraft does. It is slowly trending back towards the runway centre line. 2 reds, 2 whites there on the PAPI. So we'll disconnect, get a feel for how the aircraft flies manually. And as we do so, the modes are all wrong there. We still want to see glide, slope and loc. And definitely a little bit strange there in pitch. The aircraft very sensitive in pitch, that's checked 500. A little bit fiddly there as well, following the flight directives. 400. Yeah, so not a huge fan of how the aircraft feels to fly, I've got to say. It's a little bit reminiscent of the default A320 in its earlier days.
300.
Just going to disregard the flight directives more or less, they seem to be putting us a little bit low. Going to be an interesting landing with that pitchy movement.
Just on 745, contact departures.
Roger, just on 745.
100.
As usual, the PAPI and the glide slope there not really aligning.
60, 50, 40.
So cutting the thrust.
20.
The aircraft definitely feeling a little bit odd in the flare.
5.
Okay, let's touch down. Needing a boot full of right rudder here for 10 knots of wind, which is more or less down the runway. That's full right rudder and using a little bit of braking there as well to get the aircraft back on the centre line. Anyway, we'll come on to the brakes. We've got full reverse here, we'll vacate next left. Again, we'll backtrack down Alpha and head in towards the international terminal. So there you go, ladies and gents. I do hope you enjoyed our run across the Tasman Sea and our look at the LatinVFR A330-900 NEO. I'm not going to labour the conclusion here too much, as again this is not intended to be a full review of the add-on. I will just briefly break down though each aspect of the product, let you know my thoughts, and try and give you an overall impression of what the 900 has to offer. Starting with the visuals, pretty decent on the outside overall. Really nice as well that we have all of the external ground equipment options, they certainly help bring the aircraft to life. Internally, as far as the modelling goes, the cockpit does broadly look like an A330. Certainly there are quite a few modelling errors if you really want to pick things apart, if you are particularly familiar with the aircraft. I can live with the modelling. It would have been nice to see slightly better texturing. I think when you are looking at these sort of mid-level add-ons, then you really want to see excellent texturing, as again, it really helps to bring the aircraft to life. On the graphical front, again, we mentioned it a few times throughout the flight, but if nothing else, I would really like to see those displays brightened up. It was pretty hard to read them really throughout the entirety of the flight. As far as the aircraft systems go, I would say they sit somewhere between the default A320 and the fly-by-wire A320. Certainly much more towards the default end of the spectrum, although again it is nice that we do have certain features modelled that are very specific to the A330. LatinVFR are also very upfront about the fact that this is essentially a modified A320 when it comes to the aircraft systems, and as long as the dev is upfront about these sorts of things, personally I take no issue with them. Not everybody of course is looking for a study level jet. That being said, there are certainly aspects of the automation that could use improvement. For example, the VNAV didn't hit all of the targets there on the way down, and the aircraft did do quite a few peculiar things throughout our flight, which again, I'm sure if you are familiar with the Airbus, you'll probably have picked up on. As far as the flight modelling goes, the same is true there really. The flight model does an okay job of representing a heavy jet, at least as far as the performance goes, but some strange behaviours there during the takeoff, the nose wanting to auto-rotate, and the aircraft very pitchy as well during the landing. By and large, as far as manual handling goes, I would have to say that the aircraft doesn't really feel like an A330 in its current state. As far as the aircraft sounds go, generally a little bit of a mixed bag there as well. Overall, the cockpit did feel reasonably immersive. The engine sounds were generally good internally, particularly during the takeoff. There were a number of systems and switches in the cockpit that didn't have any associated sound, so it would be nice to see those refined and cleaned up. As far as additional features on the product go, I have to say that the LVFR A330 has one of the nicest lineups I've seen of any jet within the sim. Again, I really like the option for the external equipment. As you can see, that looks very nice. You get an absolute ton of liveries available out of the box, representing both real-world A330-900 operators, as well as some liveries being based on real-world A330 CEO operators. The onboard tablet, whilst being a little bit basic in terms of its UI, again has many great options. We have Navigraph capabilities, SimBrief integration. You can set the aircraft up in terms of weight and balance, you can request live METAR data. You can also run performance numbers, configure the aircraft externally. Really, whilst again the screen is a little bit dark, otherwise the onboard tablet pretty much does everything you would want it to do. As far as the aircraft's FPS performance goes, you will take a little bit of a hit with the 900. I was getting around 87 frames per second in the A330 versus around 130 frames in the default Cessna 152. Lastly, and very importantly, it is worth noting that LatinVFR have already made a post on their Facebook page addressing many of the issues that I have mentioned here in today's video. I'll pin a comment down below with the main details of that post. Certainly though, it's always great to see a developer continuing to work on an add-on after release. In summary then, I do think that the LatinVFR A330-900 has broadly achieved what it sets out to do. The aircraft could certainly use some further refinement, and again, whilst this is not the sort of add-on that I would typically choose to fly myself in the sim, the aircraft does offer a generally decent option for those more casual simmers amongst us. And certainly, whilst I gather the aircraft does currently have a few bugs on the console, once those are fixed up, I think it makes for another decent option in a market where choices are somewhat more limited. That being said, if you are anything outside of a casual simmer, or otherwise perhaps a massive fan of the A330-900 specifically, it does have to be noted that there are some far more detailed add-ons retailing at a fairly similar price to the A330-900. Either way, I do hope you enjoyed the video and found it useful. I trust it's given you some idea of what the product has to offer. If you did enjoy the flight, then please consider giving the video a like. If you would like to see more content from the channel, then please do consider subscribing as well. And if you'd like to help support the channel further, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron. Links to both of those will be down in the video description below. As always, a very big thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support. It is very much appreciated. And to all of you, I do hope you're having a great day, wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.